I'm back. I'm back. Quick little update before I get into the bulk of the video. For some reason, my laptop fixed itself. How? I don't know. It just happened. It literally just happened. I thought something was wrong with the network key, and then all of a sudden, I decided to record this video yesterday, and all of a sudden, it's fixed. It's like, okay. So, with that in mind, is I, Dark Symphony 777, your fellow readers, and this is another fanfiction review. As always, link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, and leave a comment in the comment section below on any future stories you want me to read or review. So, this story is going to be Mega Man Iris. It's a Mega Man fanfiction written by Kerplop. Fun fact, this is actually the oldest story on fanfiction.net, as far as I know, that has a TV tropes page. That's very surprising. Granted, it's probably the oldest fanfiction that has a TV trope. No, there's My Immortal, but we don't talk about My Immortal. We don't talk about that. You take that page, you crumple it on a ball, you throw it in a trash can, you lit the trash can on fire, you pick up the trash can, you bring it to a cold intersection, you plop it down, and say, "Oh, boss, here's your fire for the night." Yeah. So let's get started. So for first things we gotta know, in terms of the plot, is the timeline of Mega Man, because Mega Man has a really weird timeline. So the story takes place 100 years after the events of X. Now this story was written, and I have the page. Oh, let's see. It was first published in May 20th, 2001. So Mega Man Zero didn't exist yet. We have two timelines in the games. We have the first one, which is Classic X, Zero, ZX, and then Legends, and then the alternate timeline, which is Battle Network and Star Force. So for the main timeline, we're just going to cut out Zero, ZX, and Legends. Despite the fact Legends did exist around this time, but didn't know where but nobody knew where it fell on the timeline. We didn't know where Legends stand in the grand scheme of, story in terms of his significance. It's still around 2005, 2006 when ZX showed up. And, we got more information about the timeline. So, something in my throat. Sorry about that. So, the story follows the character named Iris. Iris is from Mega Man X4. She was the love interest of Zero. And she basically was the person who kind of gave Zero a lot of this development and kind of made him a three-dimensional character. And then Captain decided to screw it up and kill Iris at the end, which completely just said, "Fuck yeah!" And honestly, that pissed me off when I first got to Iris. It's like, no, we have to kill Iris? No, I liked Iris. And then after the game, Zero just went back to his emo self with his long, flowing, blonde, golden hair, flaxen, whatever you want to call it. So this story takes place 100 years after the events of X5, mainly because, they reference X5 of the wazoo. Not X6 though, because reasons. Because X6 doesn't exist. We don't talk about X6. We don't talk about X7 too. We can talk about X8 because that's actually a good game. At least X6 had a decent soundtrack. Okay, fine. I was lying. X6 did happen. So it's 100 years after the events of X6. Let's just leave it at that. Reploids and humans are living together again. At this point in time, X8 never came out, so the Jacob's ladder wasn't even a thing in the story. And so this group of scientists in a St. Paul museum, which I found out thanks to this story, what is the capital of Minnesota. I did not know that before reading the story the second time. Now I have the hiccups. And they get the parts of Iris Thorn Kerplot, I think, was the person who kind of coined her last name, because we just know it was Iris, and that's it. And so Iris Thorn, I like that. It comes off the tongue really easily, that name. And you know, they repair Iris and then they fix her up. They get rid of the Maverick virus, which is not true. Before I go any further, I have to clear up some misconceptions. The author actually didn't know, more than likely didn't know about this information, because this information was restricted to Japan. The first 4 Mega Man X games, they had mangas in Japan. They were released in the late 1990s, and they basically cleared up some information about that stuff. Same thing as Dea Sigma, you know, actually, you know, with stuff like that, how that happened. And in Mega Man X4, Iris wasn't really a Maverick. Yes, in Mega Man X4, Repliforce, which is this police force, was labeled as Maverick because Colonel, Iris' brother, was kind of strong-headed, and when Zero told him to lower the weapon and we'll turn you in so we can figure out what's happening, he's like, no, we will not turn into weapons. And then basically flat out said, Repliforce going on a coup. And basically the Maverick Hunters had no choice but to label Repliforce as Mavericks, because, you know, they didn't, because when an entire city falls to the ground, which is what happened at the beginning with Sky Lagoon, and, you know, when you tell someone, it's like, hey, lower your weapon and come on, let's just go clear. It's like, no, and we're gonna fight. And, you know, they get kind of suspicious, and of course they're labeled as Mavericks. Iris is technically the only one who kind of sort of went Maverick, but at the same time didn't, because the Mega Man X4 manga revealed that Iris and Colonel were actually supposed to be one robot meant to replicate Mega Man X's behavior paradox. Basically what that means is, you know, he acts human, he has free will, stuff like that, because he was built by Dr. Light, and he had about 100 years of programming put into him, constantly being updated and upkeeped. You know, so he has a way to avoid this paradox somehow. And that leads into the events of Mega Man Zero, because Iris and Colonel were supposed to foreshadow that even X would fall victim to this paradox and kind of go mad, which is what was supposed to happen in the first Mega Man Zero, with Mega Man X being the main villain until Capcom went behind Inafune's back, made X6, and he had to rework everything into like basically a duplicate Mega Man X. And Colonel Iris are supposed to represent 2 different aspects of Mega Man's personality. Colonel is the fighter, but Iris is the pacifist. And what happened in the manga is when Zero and Colonel fought at the the spaceport, and Colonel passed away, Iris was overcome with grief and picked up and grabbed his AI unit. And when you play Mega Man X4, you can either look it up, or, you know, if you have access to the game, either get on an emulator, or the Mega Man X collection, or the Mega Man X Legacy collection, whatever you want to do. And you see, and when you get to Iris, she's holding this purple orb. That is Colonel's AI unit. And so what that happens is, it overloads her circuitry and her AI unit, and it causes the paradox of her kind of going mad. So in essence, she doesn't go Maverick, she just goes kind of crazy. And, you know, and she kind of gets out of it when, you know, Zero stops her. And then she dies. And then we get the infamous "What am I fighting for?" scene. What am I fighting for? God dang it. That scene will never... Oh my god. So, Iris is built. She kind of has, you know, this now serum that prevents her from going Maverick. Despite the fact she didn't technically go Maverick. None of the Repliforce really went Maverick except for Skyver and X5 because he was the last one left. And she's built by this scientist named Dr. Smith in a museum. And so we fixed you up. Now, you want to work here? And she gets a job not only with him, but with other characters named Darren, he's a human. Sharon, she's a fire type Reploid. And Snake Man! Snake Man shows up out of stinking nowhere. He said, I want to... And I'll get more into them when I get to the characters. But this is the plot. So Iris, you know, she likes working there, and then she finds out that Zero might still be alive, but you know, and then Smith, Darren and Sharon go on this adventure to try and save Zero, while they're being hunted by Mavericks from the X Games, being bossed around by this rich guy named Ivo Rebison. And then the story kind of ends with her saving Zero. Everyone's hunky-dory, you know. Zero and Iris, they reunite. And you know, Ivan Rebison, he promises revenge, opening up a chance for a sequel, which did happen. I'll get more into the sequel and why I'm not going to be able to review that later. So overall, I actually liked the plot. The problem with the plot was it was too rushed. I could see what the author was going with, and more than likely, the author is actually still writing fan fictions, or at least still on the site. So more than likely, the author wrote this entire story when he or she was a kid. So I have no problem with that. I liked, despite the fact it happened in 2001, the author kept a coherent plot. Sure, it rushed a lot, but it was coherent in all the right places, and you know, it still flowed well enough together that, you know, I can't really completely criticize it. And that's that. Character development. We have Iris. She is the peaceful side of Mega Man X, but her trying to, you know, wanting to be braver and wanting to, you know, want to be with Zero through hell or high water, that she's willing to, in essence, abandon her programming, what she was built for, and, you know, kind of be a fighter, despite the fact she's canon, not programmed not to fight. The reason why she fought in X4 was she went psycho, and she had Colonel's AI, which was the fighter aspect. For her, doing that in her own morals was at least a nice touch. More than likely, the author didn't know about the background because, again, the manga was only released in Japan, and as far as I know, it's never been translated. So, then we have Smith. Smith is an old guy. He's basically just a father figure to Iris. He reminds me of Doc Brown from Back to the Future. For some odd reason. I even gave him the Doc Brown voice. Like, the Great Scott! And, you know, he was good. But there is something wrong with him. It's kind of hard to explain. I'll kind of explain it more when I get to pacing. But I like his character, but there just wasn't enough of it. And this is going to be, like, all the characters except for Iris. Iris was pretty much the only really developed character. Darren, he's this clumsy human who likes to be a mechanic, who kind of has a crush on Iris because she reminds him of his ex-girlfriend, who died in a Maverick attack when they were a little bit younger, and so he kind of has feelings for her, and you know, he's kind of goofy, but the character's not all there. Like, I expected more. And then we have Snake Man, who's Snake, who's probably the minor character of the group. He's technically a main character, but at the same time, he shows up the least. Snake Man. He was built by Dr. Wily. And he wants to be an archaeologist. He's like, he has the tongue, and he wants to go on an adventure. So I want to see what an adventure is like. And he quickly regrets, I don't want to go on an adventure. But again, there's not enough of him to really get a feel for his character. And finally, Shannon. Shannon's a fire-type replicant who was built by this guy named Dr. Sushi. I'm not joking, his name is Shushi. And she was meant to be a worker bot and then a pleasure bot when he kept raping her. And then she tried to escape, and she managed to, but then she nearly died from the ocean, so she kind of had this fear of the ocean. And then... And she tries to be tough, but she really wants to... But she's kind of sweet at the same time. Again, just like all the other characters, there's not a real feel for her character. And then finally, Ivo Rebison. He's basically this rich guy who wants to rebuild all these Mavericks to do something. There is an air of mystery to him because, you know, we don't know his reasoning for wanting to rebuild all his robots and, you know, his plan. We don't know what the plan is. There is a running theme throughout the story of all these Mavericks wanting to target Iris specifically. And despite the fact that it was left vague, it's pretty obvious based on what certain parts of the story reveal that Professor Smith worked for Ribosome, and he was instructed to, you know, repair this doomsday machine. And Smith said no, and he took a piece, and based on the writing, he put that piece in Iris. So Iris unintentionally has that missing piece of the doomsday machine that Ribosome needs, so hence why he's targeting her. That's my belief. Grammar. For a 17-year-old story, there's no grammar errors. It may be wrong. The writing is kind of, it's kind of simplistic, but, you know, it's reminiscent of someone's first story, so it's like, you know, it sways the fact that Kerplop more than likely, you know, this was the author's first story, and so didn't know all the aspects of character development, plot, and pacing and stuff like that. So, you know, you could throw a little leeway at that. Pacing. This is the only problem I have with the story, is the pacing. The pacing is rushed. Unlike, I'll get into that when I go to the recommendation. The pacing is a little rushed, so we don't have a feel for the characters. The plot is rushed, so we don't have a sense of urgency. The fights are rushed, so we don't have a feeling of suspense that, you know, that the Mavericks might actually have a chance of beating Iris and the gang. It was very obvious, like, after the first two fights that, you know, Iris is going to keep winning and constantly having, and her group is going to keep winning in, like, really anticlimactic, lackluster fashion. The only fight really worth reading was the Ribosome fight because of the fact it was a little longer and at least had some sort of suspense when Ribosome kind of turned the tables. But other than that, none of the fights are really that good, especially the Tunnel Rhino, which was a big ass pull because, you know, he was built for lava, and all of a sudden he gets hit by a plasma shot that was coated in lava somehow, and they don't explain it, and he starts melting. It's like, what? You know, you know, I would have actually liked that fight, you know, constantly go a little longer with them trying to use the lava to their advantage, to constantly having to melt Tunnel Rhino instead of just one shot melting him into a skeleton. So, yeah, so none of the fights are really sorry about that. None of the fights are really that good. They're really lackluster. Everything is rushed. Despite the fact this is like a 74,000 word story, it feels like, and it reads like it's basically half that because of how rushed it is. This needed to be a slow story. There's no world building. There's no suspense. There's nothing. When I read this story the first time, I was like, I'll give it a little bit of leeway because, again, old story, more than likely the author's first story, so it doesn't know anything. But with doing this video, I have to be doing these unbiasedly. I have to do these objectively, and so the world is empty. There's no world building. There's no real pacing to fully develop the characters. We have inklings of what they're like, but it's rushed through so fast that we don't really see that in the story. We just, they mention it and, next part. And there's that. So there's that with the review. Final thoughts. The final thought section. Would I recommend it? With a story as old as this, you have to give a certain amount of leeway. Like I did to Bertonia with the characters. In that story, I said, a lot of authors were constantly bashing on the characters, completely forgetting that these were their season 2 count versions, and they pretty much acted like that. So, so just like this, I can kind of give it leeway for the fact that it's an old story and, you know, it's aged really, really badly. But for an old story that, again, more than likely was the author's very first work of trying to write something, it's okay. It's fine. I would hesitantly give it a thumbs up. You have the inklings of the plot, of the world, of everything, but it's not all there. But if you want to read an old story that kind of harkens back to the beginnings of FanFiction.net, because again, it was written in 2001. FanFiction.net was created in 1999, like I believe August of 1999. So this is probably one of the oldest stories that has over 100 reviews. It's not the best old story. I mean, the oldest story that I read that's actually really good was one wrestling fan fiction that actually had wrestling and actually was very good. I actually might review it because it was still a very good story. And unlike Mega Man Iris, it actually aged pretty well. I believe, what was that? I can't remember the name of it. It was a wrestling fan. It's like It's old ass fan fiction. It's like older than Iris, like from 2000. Like I believe, like early 2000. So it was like probably one of the first fan fictions ever. But I have to give it a thumbs up. I have to say, it's, for you want to read something old and, like, really the good old days before all the crap happened in fan fiction with, like, that mass blanket ban of M-rated fan fictions, then, check this out. Check out Mega Man Iris. It's not the best story for what it tries to do. It does it decently enough that I can't not recommend it. Favorite part, it would have to be the entirety of Chapter 11. Why? Because it gives us a peek of what could have happened if the author actually did everything right, like get world building, get decent, coherent character development, had very good pacing. So what Chapter 11 is about is basically Iris killed her brother because her brother had Bio's chip in it. Bio, it was a high commander of Sigma, and was kind of psycho. He was basically like a psychopath, and he had his chip in Colonel's body, and so he was in charge of Colonel, and so he used that to kind of have a little bit of mind games with Iris, and kind of got her into her funk that she killed her brother. In essence, she killed him, despite the fact it wasn't his mind, it was his body, but she still killed him. And so she's upset, and so Professor Smith actually asked her, said, "Do you want to go around the town?" And so most of this chapter is just, Smith taking Iris around the city of St. Paul, and getting to know her, getting to know why she's upset, trying to cheer her up, sort of thing. And now, first off, we have world building. We kind of know what St. Paul is like, with like a church, a soup kitchen for Reploids and humans, and a little restaurant. And so we also have coherent character development. We have Iris going through this existential crisis over the fact that she's becoming what she was programmed not to do. She's becoming a fighter, and it's like, why do I have to keep fighting, and why do I have to keep doing all these things? And Smith is trying to calm her down and trying to guide her through it slowly, as like a father figure should. And it's really nice. And at the end of it, we get the scene of them heading back to the mansion. They happen upon a soup kitchen, and they see this little girl underneath a street light, shivering because she has no jacket because it's St. Paul and it's cold. And so Iris, she takes off her jacket and puts it and gives it to the girl. And she says thank you, and and the little girl gives Iris a hug. And it was very, very touching. And admittedly, just when I read it the second time, as well as the first time, a manly tear was shed because that was so touching. That was so heartwarming. It's like got me right in the feels, like. And, you know, she went in, and, you know, now they had a open, and she tried to give it back to Jack. And Iris said, you know, you can keep it. You can keep it. And she said thank you, and she went back. And, you know, it was so touching. And this one chapter basically had the promise that the author, if the author write it, could make, he or she could make it as good as the rest of the story. This story had the promise of what would happen if the story had good world building, good character development, good pacing, and everything. What would I do to change it? First off, everything I said just about a second ago, it needs to be longer. It needs to be twice, if not 3 times long. This is probably this needs to be 150,000 at least long story. This needs to be longer. There needs to be better pacing, so that way you have so that way the storytelling is better, so that way you can the pacing of the plot flows a lot better. Give us more world building. Have them explore more of each location they go to, because they go to a sunken battle. They go to a sunken frigate. They go to a smuggler's den. It was really Storm Owl's den base and a pyramid. They go to a abandoned Repliforce base. You know, we should see more of that and the area around it, as well as, you know, giving more development to the other characters and developing this world more. The pacing would also help the characters, so that way we have, you know, we can get their fears more compounded for, and you know, we have more of a feel, maybe some flashbacks over what happens in the story. That would actually help. So that way, you know, we have some character depth. And, you know, we have like Shannon, she's afraid of the ocean because of what happened, and, you know, it's rushed through that. So, you know, let's have a flashback of her getting away from the island and struggling in the ocean, and her ending up on the beach, and, you know, have her actually having some problems with the ocean, like them trying, like, have a portion of the story dedicated to her, them trying to help her at least get her onto the boat so they can, you know, get into the frigate, you know, and cover, you know, instead of like, oh, I'm afraid of the ocean, 5 sentences later, you coming? Yeah, I'm coming. It's like there's no cohesion connecting the pieces of the story together, and that's a problem, because not only did chapter 11 show us what would happen if the author put the time and effort into this, but so did the sequel. The sequel did everything that I just said that needed to be fixed and didn't. So we had more world building, we had better character development, we had a better plot, the pacing was better to allow the plot to flow better. It's just the author abandoned that story. Don't know why, but, you know, a lot of fan fictions are canned for reasons or another. I'm not gonna get into that because, you know, that's a big can of worms. But overall, I do like this story. And this story has a lot of potential. Has a lot of potential to be redone. I'm not saying, you know, go back and redo it. No, this story should be reworked from the ground up. There are stories that, you know, that are worked on. Darkness Horizon, a Resident Evil fanfiction. It was redone because the main character was a little bit too much like Gary Stu. Liberius, who I actually reviewed his Enduring the Evil stories, he's actually redoing Enduring the Evils 1, 2, and 3, and also making a story that based off Resident Evil 0, and I was the one who kind of suggested that. And granted, he kind of wanted to do that for a while, but he wanted a good reason why to do it, and I figured, you know, if you're gonna build this extended universe, you know, you have to. You should at least fix up the story and make everything flow better. There's one other story. Oh, Ballad of Squiggly. Ballad of Squiggly was an old fan fiction I actually reviewed. Go check out that video. And I kind of go into a little more detail. I'll go into it again. When I first read that story, I said I didn't like the fight scenes because they felt like it was nothing more than 2 people playing a game of Skullgirls. and then just performing combos. You make it more 3D. Don't make it like super realistic, like something you see from anime, but just add a little more reason. Have people throwing stuff, have people kind of throwing it. Use the environments of what you're establishing to your advantage to make the fights at least a little more tense, a little more enjoyable. And the author actually took my advice to heart. Hence why, if you read the synopsis, you'll say it was edited as of, you know, and it shows the date, which was basically around the time that I actually suggested, you know, just fix the fights up a little bit. Don't show, you know, have the fights be a tiny bit more tense, stuff like that. So that way, you know, the fights don't look like two players just performing combos on each other. But yeah, that's my review on Mega Man Iris. A good story, it just hasn't fulfilled its full potential. And I'm happy to be back. So happy. This has been Dark Symphony 777, and